So we're continuing on the real story of polygamy versus some of the myths, what I would consider myths that the church promotes, and that the Mormon next door videos from the girl who is trying to clear up what she feels are misunderstandings, which she and many members of the church have because of the fact that the church doesn't teach its real history concerning a lot of things. So let's see what she has to continue to say, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty and see what the ladies had to say who were propositioned by Joseph Smith, some successfully and some not.
Sure. Before I close, I wanted to also address that I've received a few messages from people with a little bit of hateful terminology, I'll even say, saying that Joseph Smith, who Mormons believe was a prophet, was a sex-crazed scumbag who just wanted to marry a bunch of women in order to have sex with all these women. Now, I looked into this claim, as well as other people, other authors and such, to find out what the truth is, because, let's be honest, none of us, the critics or us Mormons, were alive during the times of Joseph Smith, so we can go back to the records. And the evidence, as I've read and as other people have read, shows quite the opposite. In fact, new evidence has come out recently, and I'll include links in the video description, showing that Joseph Smith was more of a reluctant polygamist. He wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of practicing polygamy, but God made it very clear, a few times actually, before he actually practiced polygamy, that that was what was going to need to happen. And so Joseph Smith agreed to do it because God is all-knowing, and you follow God's advice, right? Or commandments even. But Joseph Smith wasn't only just a reluctant polygamist, he treated his wives very kindly. In fact, Joseph Smith himself was martyred in his 30s, and even after that, his wives never said anything critical about him. They said he was a loving person. He genuinely cared about mankind. He wasn't this sex-crazed maniac like people say, according to the evidence. So if you have that opinion of Joseph Smith being this scumbag, I challenge you to click on the links that I've included in the video.
Okay, well, thanks for clearing that up. We wouldn't want to think that Joseph Smith was chasing women on his own. No, in fact, she says he was a reluctant polygamist. He didn't want to obey the Lord and keep this harsh commandment, but it was God's commandment, so the Lord knows best, and he just did it. But the Lord advised him and warned him. I think she says before he started practicing polygamy. I think she's referring to the angel with the drawn sword threats. Actually, Joseph Smith was impregnating the orphan girl, teenager, 16-year-old, that lived with them, kind of like a foster girl. In 1833, which is long before any of these supposed revelations or any priesthood authority for sealing, etc. And after he impregnated her, she was nannying and earning her keep, supposedly, and I think that things got a little bit out of hand with her earning her keep, and Emma spotted them in the barn through a crack, and when she turned up pregnant, Emma kicked her out. So there she was, an orphan girl, pregnant on the street. And is that what Heavenly Father commanded? Did he command Joseph Smith to do that? So she says there's new evidence. That's the same story they were telling many years ago when I first heard it. Joseph didn't want to, but he did it to be obedient to the Lord. So we're going to see what the ladies in Nauvoo had to say about it. And now that we've already shown that this was not correct, the other statement that she just made, the Lord telling them, warning him before he did it, he must be a polygamist. So, yeah, the Lord was telling him to break his sacred marriage covenants, the terms upon which his wife agreed to marry him in a civil marriage. a mutually exclusive marital relationship, a covenant, and that was a covenant that the sisters were told meant nothing, and they could just go ahead and do some husband swapping and move up along the chain of priesthood authority so that they could marry someone who's going to become a god instead of their lowly husbands. So we're going to go see what the ladies had to say who actually encountered Joseph Smith's advances, including very high ranking in the church ladies. Well, as far as their husbands were, Sarah Pratt, the wife of Orson Pratt, who Joseph Smith solicited, and she turned him down, and he said, if you tell, then I'm going to ruin your reputation, which he did seek to do, accusing her of being involved with John C. Bennett. And we'll see that many of the women said the same thing, that they were threatened that their reputations would be ruined if they let the cat out of the bag as to what Joseph was doing. Now, this included Sidney Rigdon's daughter, teenage daughter, Nancy Rigdon, and there's even a letter from Joseph Smith in the church's official history, but I don't think they're sharing that on LDS.org, his advances on Nancy Rigdon. There was also Orson Hyde's wife, and he got to her, and Orson Hyde, like Orson Pratt, were both on missions that Joseph Smith sent them on in Europe when he went after their wives. So we're going to start with Sarah Pratt, wife of Apostle Orson Pratt, who rebuffed Joseph while her husband was away on a mission Joseph sent him on. Okay, so here's the story. Orson Pratt's wife, Sarah. Sometime in late 1840 or 1841, Joseph Smith confided to his friend, I believe that's probably John C. Bennett, that he was smitten by the amiable and accomplished Sarah Pratt and wanted her for one of his spiritual wives. This is not the regular polygamy. This was the much expanded group. Well, we'll talk about that, the concubinage, soon. For the Lord had given her to him as a special favor for his faithfulness. Emphasis in original. Shortly afterward, the two men took some of Bennett's sewing to Sarah's house. During the visit, as Bennett describes it, Joseph said, Sister Pratt, the Lord has given you to me as one of my spiritual wives. I have the blessings of Jacob granted me, as God granted holy men of old. And as I have long looked upon you with favor and an earnest desire of concubinal bliss, I hope you will not repulse or deny me. And is that the great secret that I am not to utter? Sarah replied. I am called upon to break the marriage covenant and prove recreant to my lawful husband? I never will. She added, I care not for the blessings of Jacob. I have one good husband, and that is enough for me. But according to Bennett, the prophet was persistent. Finally, Sarah angrily told him on a subsequent visit, Joseph, if you ever attempt anything of this kind with me again, I will make a full disclosure to Mr. Pratt on his return home. Depend on it, I will certainly do it. Sister Pratt, the prophet responded, I hope you will not expose me, for if I suffer, all must suffer, so do not expose me. Will you promise me that you will not do it? If you will never insult me again, Sarah replied. I will not expose you unless strong circumstances should require it. If you should tell, the prophet added, I will ruin your reputation. Remember that. Well, so this is John C. Bennett, who has been much maligned as a traitor by the LDS Church, by Joseph Smith, so forth. John C. Bennett got caught doing what Joseph was doing and let the cat out of the bag. But Sarah Pratt gives the same testimony. She later divorced her husband. She got tired of him being so involved with the younger ladies he took on. She said she had a good husband, polygamy ruined him, so she divorced him later in Utah when he was still an apostle. But at this point, he had a nervous breakdown when he got back and found out Joseph had gone after his wife. The next one here is on Jane Law, the wife of William Law, who was also in the first presidency. And Joseph went after his wife, and you can read about that in a bit, but I'm going to follow up on Sarah Pratt's story as well. There were many women who testified. It was kind of the same modus operandi that he used, and he used Mrs. Durfee to help accomplish things along the way. So many reputable Mormon women testified against what Joseph Smith was doing, and many men did as well. As a matter of fact, Oliver Cowdery was initially excommunicated, maybe for a couple of reasons. One thing is that, well, he didn't want to give his farm up to Joseph Smith after they'd, bought farms in Missouri, and while Joseph Smith was ruining everybody financially with the Kirtland illegal bank, anti-banking, whatever. It was trying to be a bank, but they couldn't get a legal charter, so they just did it anyway. Yeah, so he'd have money for land speculation, and he said the Lord wanted everybody to put their money in it, and then the banking crash hit, which apparently the Lord didn't warn him of, so everybody got ruined, and half the church left. So, anyway, Cowdery and Whitmer had bought farms, and then he tried to say everybody needed to give everything to the church again, and they weren't into it. Plus, Cowdery revealed that he called Joseph Smith's affair with Fanny Alger, the 16-year-old girl that he impregnated while she was living with them, and she was thrown out by him, a pregnant teenager. Oliver Cowdery described this as a dirty, nasty, filthy affair, and David Whitmer, another one of 3 witnesses also. Now, these are the guys that chose the apostles, by the way, in case you don't know church history. The 3 witnesses selected the apostles. And so Whitmer said Joseph was a fallen prophet and an adulterer too. He wasn't too pleased with what was going on. It became more and more evident. So, of course, Joseph Smith came up with a revelation saying that they didn't practice polygamy, and that was what was in the Doctrine and Covenants for a long, long time after he was even dead. We didn't see 132 in there till polygamy was about done. This is a paper called Joseph Smith and His Concubines by Grant Palmer, and he's a pretty knowledgeable guy. He was in the church for a long time. I think he was a CES director, actually. Sometimes they get him mixed up. There's also Richard Packham, and they had similar histories somewhat. So it talks about the concubinage, not about the 34 gals that the church admits to, but about the many. Anyway. And so what Mormon girl next door says Joseph treated his wife so well. Well, Joseph Jackson said that a lot of these girls lived in deplorable conditions that were his, at his beck and call for him. He and Hiram and John Bennett and a bunch of other guys. So this document goes through that. You really ought to download it and read it. You ought to read Joseph Jackson's testimony as well. And he probably knew a lot more about Joseph Smith's polygamy than a lot of people. But here we go with Sarah Pratt's story continues. So Lucinda Harris, who I believe, she was remarried as, I think she was William, Captain Morgan's wife, who was killed for showing up, revealing Masonic secrets. Anyway, so let's continue on this. Lucinda and her husband, George Harris, moved to far west Missouri in about 1837. In March 1838, Joseph and Emma moved in with the Harrises and stayed with them until May. Sarah Pratt, wife of Apostle Orson Pratt, at that time later said of her friend Lucinda, "Mrs. Harris was a married lady, a very good friend of mine. When Joseph had made his dastardly attempt on me, I went to Mrs. Harris to unbosom my grief to her. To my utter astonishment, she said, laughing heartily, 'How foolish you are! I don't see anything so horrible in it. Why, I am his mistress since 4 years.'" God made him do it, broke his wife's heart and their marriage covenants, the laws of the land, lying about it, and apostles' wives of Pratt, Hyde Kimball, Kimball's daughter, Rigdon's daughter, and William Law's wife. Next video.